Death, a fundamental aspect of life. Every single living thing will eventually die. You, me, your family, my family, everyone. Some people have absolutely no trouble accepting this concept as just another fact of life. One as immutable and unchanging as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. However, I'm willing to bet that if you read the title of this video and still clicked on it, then you're most likely not one of those people. Now, you might not have the same fascination with and crippling fear of death in the same way as I do, but something compelled you to click. Perhaps you're just curious. Perhaps you have a loved one with a serious illness. Perhaps you have a serious illness. Whatever the reason may be though, just know that I'm truly grateful that you're here. Sometimes it helps to just know that we're not quite as alone as it might seem. After all, we're all in this together. Each and every one of us will one day have to face the conclusion of our lives. You can try to run from that fact perhaps. God knows that I have a time or two, but there's no real escaping it. Death is inevitable. However, we don't have to be helpless in the face of it. We can decide how we face our end. Do we meet our maker hiding and sniveling under the covers like cowards? Or do we meet death with dignity and our heads held high like men? Personally, I know which way that I'll choose. But what about you? Every single night of my life, as I lay myself down to sleep, I suffer from a panic attack. Now obviously, people can have panic attacks over many different things. Over anything, really. However, my own attacks are always caused by the exact same reason. Death. My death, my partner's death, my mother's death, and worst of all, my daughter's death. Just the mere thought of any of these actually coming to pass will send me into an absolute tailspin of panic and terror. My chest constricts, my breathing increases, my palms get sweaty. It becomes difficult to even think coherently. Now, it's not easy for me to put my finger on what exactly it is about death that scares me so much. Obviously, there's the fear of the unknown, of what we don't, of what we can't possibly know. This fear is a completely natural one, of course, one that is shared by almost every single human being in existence. You see, we humans are social creatures. We find profound comfort in the familiar, in the normal, in the routine. So it only makes sense that we would fear the unknown, fear the unknowable. In fact, we don't just fear it, we can't even grasp it, understand it on a fundamental level. I mean, how can you perceive, how can you wrap your mind around the notion of a total cessation of thought, emptiness, infinite blackness? We can't picture the unpicturable. We can't conceptualize the complete lack of a concept. Now, please bear with me for a second here, people, because it's personal anecdote time. My memory is not great by any means. Even though I've been completely sober for well over 5 years now, a whole lifetime of drug abuse has wreaked havoc upon my brain. Most of the memories of my life only exist now, hidden behind a wall of gray fog and mist. However, there are still a few instances that I can recall with startling clarity, and one of these clear memories pertains highly to the subject we're discussing today. I'm referring to the very first time that I ever truly realized that I was going to die. Obviously, at least on a factual level, I already knew this, but this was the very first time that I truly understood exactly what death meant. I was 16 years old. I remember that the realization snatched the very breath from my body. I stood there, just staring off into the distance, but seeing nothing. clenching and unclenching my fist. You see, I am in love with life. I love every single thing about it, even its negative aspects. So in a sense, I even love death. But the profound realization I had that someday it would all vanish, that it would all disappear, shook me to the very core of my being. I was still young at the time, though, and so the funk that this revelation caused me was relatively easy to shake off. Youth has the advantage in these kind of situations, and so I was able to continue on with my life and even enjoy myself on occasion. But it was still always there, in the back of my mind, waiting, building, looming ominously like a thunderstorm over my head. Over the years, I have come face to face with death many times. You see, at this point in my life, I had actually fully accepted that I was going to die, which I believe is a healthy mindset to have for the most part, at least in moderation. At the time, though, I didn't really believe in moderation. I had a tendency to take things to extremes, even my beliefs concerning death. At the time, I just didn't care. In other words, I was selfish and stupid. Over the years, though, life wore me down little by little. There was the car wreck in my early 20s, where I broke most of my ribs and peeled the flesh right off of my ugly mug. This forced me to come face to face with the cold realization that I wasn't actually invincible after all. Other incidents would follow this one: accidents, overdoses, and even suicide attempts. Death was no longer a stranger to me. He and I were pretty well acquainted at this point. And maybe that familiarity is the reason why I didn't really fear him at the time. Perhaps my youth smoothed over any fear and misgivings that I might have had, and I'm sure that the drugs helped as well. Despite my stupidity back then, I sometimes find myself feeling envious of my younger self, of my naive beliefs. Life was just easier back then, less complicated, less terrifying. Now I live a life of almost constant fear. There's a tragic irony in that, of course. I'm so worried about death that I'm forgetting to actually live my life. Death is my constant companion. It's always on my mind. Even if I manage to somehow have a good time, it's never too far away. I used to be able to see the good in life, but no longer. This constant and sustained fear has stripped all joy from me. To my eyes, everything is dead, gray, colorless. I feel as though I'm just waiting to die, marking time. It's extremely hard to care about anything when this is your outlook on life. After all, if everyone I know and love is just going to die, then nothing really matters, now does it? I'm aware that this is an extremely negative mindset to have, but I simply cannot help it. Perhaps exploring death more deeply throughout the rest of this video will help me, and hopefully you, better put it into its proper perspective. When I was a teenager, which was a long time ago, I was one of those annoying know-it-all atheists. You know the type, the ironically holier-than-thou, self-righteous, arrogant fool. The type to throw a hissy fit if a relative happens to quietly pray before dinner. I cringe hard when I think of my behavior back then. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't any negative aspects to religion. Of course there are. Many of them. However, what I would never admit throughout my teenage years was that there are many positive aspects to religion as well, not the least of which is the religious person's relationship with death. I'm 34 years old now, and I'm still not a religious person by any means. I simply cannot bring myself to believe. However, I certainly wish that I could. But why, you may ask? Why has my viewpoint changed so drastically over the years? Well, the answer is, once again, unsurprisingly, death, and my all-consuming fear of it. It's like a black hole in the middle of my life, devouring every single thing that's good and pure within its black depths. So for that reason, these days I'm highly envious of the truly devout. Now, I'm not referring to a person who only goes to church on occasion, or someone who only attends to fulfill some obscure sense of social responsibility. I'm talking about the truly devout here, the ones who honestly believe in the gospel. I'm sure you can see why someone who's terrified of death would be highly envious of a person like that. If you truly believe in the concept of an afterlife, one where you'll happily spend all of eternity with your loved ones, then why would you ever fear death? Personally, I'd be looking forward to it. When I was in my early 20s, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. My family has never been religious by any means. I attended Sunday school a few times throughout my youth, but that was about it. However, when my mom got sick, she turned to the comfort of religion. This is a natural human reaction, of course, but also an honest one. At the time, she was potentially facing the end of her life, and she was incredibly brave throughout her ordeal. And this is what ultimately changed my perception on religion. I had always viewed religious people as arrogant and misguided, both in their behavior and in their beliefs. I was highly skeptical of all religious people that I met. No, this wasn't at all fair on my part, but nonetheless, that is how I felt back then. However, my mother's quiet, desperate turn to the gospel revealed to me a whole nother reality of religion, and what I personally believe is its true purpose in this world. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if religion is correct on a factual level. You see, it's all about perception. My mother truly believed in the concept of an afterlife, and this belief provided her with profound comfort throughout the darkest part of her life. Who was I to try and take that away from her with my snarky atheist attitude? Do I personally believe in God now? No, but I want to, desperately. I want to believe more than anything. I just can't. And I'm not really sure why, but I just can't. However, due to my mother's illness, I gained a profound respect for and gratitude to religion. And I still believe that religion is the best way to deal with your fear of death. If you're suffering from that awful fear, just like I am, then I highly recommend looking into religion. Put aside your pride and your resentment and give it a real chance. Worst case scenario, you simply remain an atheist. But on the other hand, perhaps you'll gain a new perspective, and maybe even eliminate the terror of death altogether. Over the course of 192,000 years, demographers have estimated that 109 billion people have lived and died upon our Earth. And every single one of those people had their own lives, their own hopes, their own dreams. When I think of this stark reality, I can't help but feel extremely insignificant. After all, what does the life of one random man really matter in the face of all that history? Occasionally, I've noticed a real arrogance in people when concerning the past. Some seem to belabor in the belief that since we were born in the present day, we're somehow superior to all those who've come before. But I'm here to tell you we aren't, not even in the slightest. In fact, in many ways, we're lesser than those from the past. There seems to be a trend these days where people view the past as being a hopelessly ignorant and racist place. This belief seems to be especially prevalent within Gen Z. However, nothing could be further from the truth. Even the mundane issues that people from the past faced in their everyday lives would be enough to have most of us curling up into the fetal position. It doesn't really matter what time period we're talking about either. Life was very difficult for all of our ancestors. And with a hard life, unfortunately, comes the near constant presence of death. I'm sure that many people watching this video have had loved ones die, have had friends die, and I would never try and take away from that tragedy. However, in the past, people died on a scale that we simply cannot even imagine today. With the help of all our medicine and technology, we've managed to prolong our life expectancy to its furthest ever extent. I wonder if people from the past familiarity with death actually lessened their fear of it. After all, when we see them every single day, we humans are quick to become comfortable with things. But then again, maybe it was the exact opposite. I mean, I can't even imagine knowing that I likely only have 40 or so years total in order to live. Throughout the ages, attitudes towards death and dying in general have changed and been shaped by religious, intellectual, and philosophical beliefs and conceptions. Archaeologists have even discovered evidence that as early as the Paleolithic period, around 3 million years ago, humans held metaphysical beliefs about death and dying. Ancient tools that were excavated from burial sites around the world suggest highly that our earliest ancestors believed in some sort of afterlife, or at least that some element of an individual will survive after death. Were all of these beliefs formed due to a universal fear of death? After all, it's very comforting to think that after we're dead and buried, some bit of ourselves will carry on. Throughout the endless years, many different people have believed many different things about the afterlife, and I believe all of these were born from our instinctive fear of dying. But then again, maybe that's just me coping. Death, of course, is ubiquitous in our culture, in every culture. Death, being a fundamental fact of life, can be found in every artistic medium, from novels all the way to VR games. I believe that death's representation in art is a manifestation of its constant presence in our own thoughts. Our inevitable end is never really too far from our minds, even in the most well-adjusted of people. And in someone like me, it's a near constant presence. I truly doubt that a whole minute goes by per day where I don't think about dying, at least while I'm conscious, and sometimes even when I'm not. After all, our dreamscape is a perfect place for our most insidious of fears to take hold and grow roots. In many ways, death shapes every single thing that we do. Death provides an urgency to life that otherwise wouldn't be there. As it is, we know that there's a certain timetable to our lives. We need to grow up, move out, get jobs, get married, settle down, have children, all within a certain amount of time, or all of it may never take place. Realistically, we only have 40 or so good years available to us upon this earth. That isn't to say that you can't still enjoy life in your old age. Of course you can. However, older age comes with all of its complications, including disease and general attrition. There are plenty of people out there who manage to age gracefully, but I am certainly not one of them. At only 34 years old, my body feels more like it's 80. This is due to many different factors, of course, including extensive drug abuse and general recklessness. Another factor that I'm positive took years off of my life was my chronic insomnia. For some reason, there seems to be a bit of a stigma when it comes to this disease. People, including most medical professionals, just don't seem to take it very seriously at all. Now, I suppose this could be due to people's routine over-exaggeration. I'm sorry, but waking up a couple of times throughout the night is not insomnia. At least not my definition of it. At the very worst of my suffering from the disease, I would go whole weeks with only a few hours of sleep. Ironically, my insomnia coincided with, and possibly reinforced, my complete lack of fear towards death. After going for literal days with little to no sleep, I remember routinely wishing to die, just so that I could finally get some rest. Death and its influence can be found everywhere we look. However, it isn't often that we get an honest portrayal of death in any artistic medium. In reality, death is awful, disgusting, foul, and we hardly ever see that aspect of it portrayed anywhere. After all, it makes sense. We humans don't like to dwell on horrible things, and make no mistake, death is horrible. So, what did we learn from this brief exploration of death? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not really sure that we learned anything, because I wasn't really setting out to teach anything. My goal in making this video was just to show you that if you're struggling with the fear of death, then you are not alone. There are millions of people out there who feel exactly the same way as you do. People who exist every moment absolutely fixated upon their impending end. And as I said in the introduction, we're all in this together. Yes, we'll have to face our final moments completely on our own. But until then, we can build a vibrant and thriving community of like-minded individuals. It truly helps to know that there are others out there just like us. People with the same thoughts. People with the same fears. I have no idea what happens when we die. If we continue on in some form, or if we completely cease to exist altogether. But I do know that it's important to not waste even one moment of the time we've been given upon this earth. Yes, this creates a bit of a paradox. After all, the more in love with life we are, the more we'll fear losing it. Unless we can properly contextualize death, put it into its proper perspective, its proper place, as just another part of life, one that should be more loved and less feared. After all, without death, we would have none of the urgency that makes this life so incredible.